Greeting viewers. We hope you're well and in good health. It's a pleasure to have you join us today. This is part 3 of our ongoing Healthy Cities series. Today we cover yet another critical subject in the matter of establishing wholesome cities. Before we begin, kindly note the following. This session will be recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, Columbia Global Centers. You're welcome to review this session on our Healthy City series playlist at your pleasure. As we proceed, please post your questions under the Q&A section. The moderator will direct them to our panel members. Follow us on social media. That way you will not miss any of our upcoming programs. CGC Nairobi for both Facebook and Twitter. For Ifri, it's at Ifri_Institute I. I would now like to welcome Dr. Murugi Dirango to open the session. Welcome, Dr. Dirango.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's event. As Paulina said, my name is Murugi Dirango, and I'm the director of Columbia Global Centers Nairobi. CGC Nairobi is part of Columbia University's global network of 9 centers that aim to create research and education opportunities. In addition to our center here in Nairobi, Columbia University has also established centers in Amman, Jordan, Beijing, China, Istanbul, Turkey, Mumbai, India, Paris, France, Rio in Brazil, Santiago, and Tunis. The Nairobi Center serves as a regional hub for research and collaboration as part of Columbia University's strategy to achieve a global presence. It links the Eastern and Southern Africa region to Columbia's scientific rigor, technological innovation, and academic leadership. Today, we are delighted and honored to partner with the French Institute of International Relations, Ifri, and Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy to host today's webinar on stepping up energy electricity uses as part of our Healthy Cities series. According to the United Nations, Africa's urban population is growing at a very high rate from about 27% in 1950 to 40% in 2015 and projected to reach 60% by 2050. As people move into urban areas from rural areas, the majority stop using old traditional energy resources, such as firewood, the kind that my grandmother used and the kind that I would help her collect when I went to visit her in central Kenya. And as these people move into the urban areas, they start to depend more on paraffin, on charcoal, on gas, and electricity. Now, as a public health person, the choice depends, according to me, of course, electricity is the cleanest of these types of energy, but the choice at the individual level, at the individual household level, will depend on access and affordability. However, in most African urban areas, energy is still generated from non-renewable resources such as hydroelectric power, and more recently, we are seeing a turn to coal. As African governments discover and start to exploit natural resources such as coal deposits, we see the tension between governments, climate and community activists on whether to continue investing in non-renewable resources or shift to renewable energy, such as solar energy. We see governments asking questions about, we have these deposits of coal, for example, in Eastern Kenya that were discovered recently. Why can we not, pull them from the ground and use them to drive our economy? The same resources and non-renewable resources were used by the Northern Hemisphere, the countries in the Northern Hemisphere, to drive their economies forward. Why can we not benefit the same way? So these are questions that we are starting to see a push and pull. Community groups who are coming in and really protesting, indicating the fact that they do not want their land to be exploited for energy such as coal because of all the, the negatives that we know are associated with this kind of energy. So electricity supply in most urban areas in Africa also tends to be unreliable and expensive, keeping it out of reach of many low-income households. Businesses are also starting to shift from the national grid of electricity to more reliable resources such as solar, again, due to cost and due to the unreliability of that electricity. So these are some of the issues that our panelists will discuss today. And I'm excited that we really have a rich, group of panelists that really will go and delve into these issues to enlighten us on how we should think about clean energy, how we should balance the needs from the different groups that are involved. So let me now invite Dr. Marc-Antoine Elmazega, the director of Ifri Center for Energy and Climate, to welcome you. Welcome, Marc-Antoine.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dihangu, and it's a pleasure as well to team up with you, your colleagues in the Columbia Center on Global Climate Policy for this, I think, very topical discussion, because we are now in a situation where, as you know, in Sub-Saharan Africa, there needs to be every year an additional job creation of 20 million if the region is to accommodate the growing young population that enters every year the labor market. The second point I think you've very well highlighted is that one of the key elements of that battle will take place in cities with the growing urbanization, while we should not, of course, neglect the rural areas where, in our view, if electricity access is improved, if infrastructures are improved, the pressure on cities from population migration will probably be lower, instead of if little or too little is happening in rural areas. If sustainable agriculture can't really develop, well, then the pressure in cities will probably be much stronger. So nevertheless, indeed, I think the issue of sustainable cities is one of the driving forces behind our Sub-Saharan Africa electricity and sustainable energy access program. And you'll hear in a few minutes, Hugo Picard, my colleague on this. I think one of the key elements that he's trying to point out in his research is also how the new technologies enable, and the new business practices actually enable really to leapfrog and to develop new systems, new solutions, often hybrid, which have not been seen elsewhere. And on the other hand, how certainly some good examples also from Asia, especially related to access to clean cooking, can also be helpful for that region. Now, our fundamental belief is that the area of coal is over. And to answer the question that you've raised, I think if you include all the externalities of coal-fired power generation, from mining to the generation to health to the environmental degradation, there is absolutely no doubt that the alternative low-carbon technologies are much more competitive and can really trigger much quicker, much faster, and much more sustainable development than using these resources that at first hand might be present, but actually that come with huge problematic externality. So I'll stop here. I'm very, very pleased that we have this conversation. I'd like to thank also our valuable speakers for joining us and all the participants, and I wish you a good discussion. Thank you very much.
Great. So why don't I take over from here as the moderator? So just to introduce myself, my name is Philip Benoit, and I'm an adjunct senior research scholar with Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy, where I lead the center's work on energy for development. It's one of the specific research initiatives that we've developed at the center, recognizing a lot of the issues and challenges around how energy can be used to support development, and recognizing that among many constraints is the climate change constraint. It's a real pleasure for us from the center, which is based in New York at Columbia's main campus, to be working with the Global Center of Nairobi. You know, when we talk about issues of development, clean energy, and climate change, having the opportunity to collaborate with the Global Center in Nairobi, which has a presence on the ground, helps to make sure that we keep everything real. In academia, sometimes we can tend away from what's being real. And so for us, it's a real pleasure to be working with the Global Center on this very important issue, as well as to partner with Ifri, which brings some very important perspectives, and very much look forward to Hugo's presentation as Marc-Antoine referred to it. So thank you, Dr. Marugi, and thank you, Dr. Marc-Antoine, for setting the table for this important discussion. Now, as you know, the challenges that Sub-Saharan Africa face to develop are challenges that it faces today and tomorrow and the next day, while there is increasing pressure to do so in a low carbon way. President Biden from the United States just convened a climate summit with many of the world's leaders, and he has often spoken of the existential threat posed by climate change. But we know that there is also another important existential threat facing Sub-Saharan Africa. Actually, arguably, it's not really a threat, but a reality, and that is the damage and destruction from underdevelopment. So today's topic on development of healthy cities needs to be seen very much in this broader context, building healthy lives, addressing local pollution issues, while also supporting critical global efforts to fight climate change that will, of course, adversely affect poorer countries. Today's panel will help to provide insights on how to meet these diverse goals, with a focus on the role that clean electricity can play in the urban setting. Just as a housekeeping matter, if you have any questions you would like to pose for the panelists, please add them in the Q&A chat box. Our first panelist is Hugo Le Picard, who is based in Paris and is a research fellow with the Center for Energy and Climate, Ifri. And thank you, Hugo, for very much organizing this event. Let me just say that I'm just going to give a very brief introduction of the various speakers, and you'll be able to find more detailed biographies in the chat box. Why don't I turn it over to you, Hugo?
Thank you very much, Philippe, for the kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here today, and I'm going to present you some of my research on what I believe will be the future of many centralized grids in Sub-Saharan Africa, and how finally how many decentralized technologies that were originally aimed to electrify rural areas could actually replace coal on the main grid. So I'm going to share my screen without further notice. Can you see my screen? It's working well. All right. So I think the main point of my presentation is that today, due to the decrease in the cost of solar and battery systems, and in the light of the urbanization difficulties that the main grid have in expanding at the same rate, consumers have an incentive to use autonomous systems for their electricity consumption. And therefore, the future of the electricity sector might be becoming more and more decentralized in densely populated urban areas, but also in those areas that are already covered today by the main grid. If we look a bit back in time, mainly due to the vastness of African countries and the importance of the population living in rural areas, it has been and still too costly for the central network alone to electrify the entire population. However, in the past decades, the rapid development of mobile telephony in Africa and mobile payment systems, as well as the falling cost of solar panels, have led to a paradigm change on access to electricity and made grid extension one option amongst many others for the electrification of the continent. And so, depending on the existing grid and population density, electrification of Africa is now seen as a combination of these three main options. So grid extension for urban areas located near existing grid infrastructures, mini-grid for densely populated areas far from the grid, and individual solar home systems for the rest. But I think it's very important that the term access to electricity be viewed with a lot of caution, and this even when a consumer is connected to the main grid. Access to electricity simply means being connected to a source of electricity, whether it's centralized or decentralized, but without necessarily having a sufficient, reliable, and affordable access to it. And in fact, power outages in the region due to the poor condition of the main grid are very common. For example, according to the World Bank, Nigeria is an extreme case. In 2014, the country had more than 32 power outages per month on average, and each lasting about 12 hours, which represented the equivalent of 16 full days without electricity every month. But it's not only about power cuts, as you can see on the graph below on the left, which is from a database I'm working on at the moment. Even when the grid is on, you see that the voltage can be also very volatile, and this can cause serious damage to business equipment. And as a consequence, this unreliability of power supply has a significant negative effect on economies, representing on average a cost from 1 to 5% of GDP, depending on the country. And to take into account these disparities in access to energy, the World Bank has set up an indicator, the multi-tier framework, which ranges from tier 0, which corresponds to quasi-nil access, to tier 5, which equates to a full access to electricity. And so as a result, there is a colossal need for investments, which necessarily depends on the levels of electricity access to be provided to the population. For example, for a level 5 access, to give access to electricity to all the Sub-Saharan population, you would need about $120 billion per year until 2040, and half of which in network infrastructures. But in 2018, only about 20 million was invested in generation and 10 billion in the networks throughout all Africa and from all sources. Therefore, private funding needs to be fully involved. However, this funding is slow to materialize in sufficient amounts because of the high risk associated with investment in the continental power sector. Indeed, most national utilities are not financially viable and are considered as unreliable partners by project developers, and thus limiting private sector investment that is held to be particularly risky. This difficult financial situation, which applies to almost all electricity utilities in Sub-Saharan Africa, besides constraining investment, also jeopardizes the survival of existing power sectors. As you can see on the left graph, that represents electricity supply cost and revenue collected in dollars per kilowatt-hour billed, all public utilities in Sub-Saharan countries are in deficit, with the exception of 2 countries, Uganda and Seychelles, and more recently, Niger. This deficit can be explained by pricing levels that are too low in view of the electricity service costs, but also by the significant technical and non-technical losses on the transmission and distribution network. And you can see an example of these transmission losses in a selection of a country on the right graph. Most of them are way above the international standards of 10%, the orange line. But you can also explain this deficit by the difficulties in recovering the revenues of the sale of electricity, also unpaid bills, and sometimes overstaffed public enterprises. Consequently, you have, in many countries, a vicious circle that is gradually taking shape. The main effect of the poor financial situation of these companies is basically reduced investment in infrastructure maintenance that in turn perpetuates obsolete grids. The quality of the service worsens and there are chronic power outages, as we saw more than 32 on average per month in some countries. And given this deterioration in service, an increasing number of customers refuse to pay for services that have become substandard, and this contributes to further revenue losses for the electricity utilities and so on. So if you want to have a large-scale development of centralized renewable in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's imperative that the sector's finances improve. But given these difficulties public utilities have in expanding their sector and improve the quality of electricity supply in many countries, consumers are tending to reappropriate access to electricity, and that even in areas that are already covered by the grid. And it's an underlying trend that will have an impact on the sector's finances and therefore on its development. In light of the growing urban population and the difficulties of the sector in expanding at the same rate, people and businesses increasingly have an incentive to use additional ways to tackle unreliability of the grid and to generate electricity. And therefore, you see many decentralized technologies that are used in areas that are covered by the grid, especially for that, to tackle unreliability and sometimes to optimize electricity expenditure. I think these investments in autonomous electricity generation capacities in the grid is further facilitated by urban populations, higher purchasing power in comparison to rural areas. Of course, today, auxiliary generators are still the preferred means for dealing with grid failures. And as you can see on the right graph, there is a very clear correlation between a generator use and power cuts in a selection of countries for which data were available. And in Nigeria, again, it's an extreme example. The aggregated installed capacity of diesel generators is estimated to be 10 to 15 gigawatts. So 2 or 3 times the available capacities that is on the central grid, which was a little bit less than 6 gigawatts according to the regulator in 2019. So you have already in Nigeria 2 to 3 times more decentralized than you have centralized capacity in the country. So there is definitely a market for decentralized systems, also in areas covered by the grid, and notably amongst consumers and businesses that want to protect themselves from grid unreliability and voltage volatility. But this trend are also opening up a new market for decentralized solar, also in urban areas in Sub-Saharan Africa. And while we know that the market for solar home system in rural areas has grown a lot in the past years, the penetration of this decentralized solar system in urban areas in Sub-Saharan Africa has not really been covered. So with a colleague and a friend, Mathieu Toulmont, as part of Ifri's Center for Energy and Climate Work Access on Sub-Saharan electrifications, we have developed a new method to estimate the penetration of this market in cities in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this map, the map that you see here, shows basically all the installed decentralized solar capacities that you have in the center of Bamako in Mali. We covered most of the main Sub-Saharan cities, and there will be shortly both an academic and an Ifri publication where we will present both this new method and an analysis of the results found. So keep it in touch if you are interested. So this asks the question, maybe the biggest market in Africa for solar home systems is not actually in rural areas or the next biggest market, but can be also in the cities. And it could mean also that beside the 600 million Sub-Saharan without access to electricity that are potential solar system customers, there is a further 700 million new clients in urban areas who have access to electricity, but who are dealing with an unreliable network. But of course, the development of this market will depend on the evolution of demand for electricity in Sub-Saharan cities, and especially the capacity of the central network of each country to develop accordingly. If we look at the long-term trend, Africa is experiencing strong demographic growth, and the continent will have more than 2.1 billion inhabitants in 2050 against 1.1 billion today, as it's been mentioned already. Likewise, the population will be 60% urban and 40% rural, with twice as many inhabitants, whereas it is now about 40% urban and 60% rural. And therefore, some megalopolis such as Abidjan, Lagos, Kinshasa will see their population double or even triple by 2035. And this high concentration of African population cities has not and does not always mean that it facilitates access to electricity. For example, electricity coverage in urban areas in Sub-Saharan Africa in the past 15 years have declined in some countries, such as Equatorial Guinea or Niger. So I'll stop my presentation on an open question. If this urbanization and population growth could be seen as an important challenge for the development of the central grid, it could also be an opportunity for grid systems. And to close the loop, maybe if the development of the main grid is a bit dirty with coal technology, etc., it could be replaced by many decentralized clean technologies also in the cities. So I will stop here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Hugo, for that very interesting presentation. I mean, I must admit it's something I myself tend not to think about, which is basically selling solar in urban areas in developing countries, because I think what we often tend to see, as you pointed out, is when we discuss rural electrification, the idea of putting solar off-grid systems in rural areas. But when we think about what's going on in developed countries, obviously there's a big push in urban areas to sell solar systems, whether it's in Washington or other countries. And as you point out, there is a big potential market in urban areas in Sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that probably segues well into our next speaker, Victor Izenwoko, who works a lot on Nigeria, based normally out of Lagos. Victor is a founding member of the Daystar Power team and currently serves as the Chief Commercial Officer of the group company, leading the business development and strategic growth of the company across the continent. Victor, look very much forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Philip. I'm happy to be here. Let me share my screen quickly. Awesome. Thank you again for having me. Victor Chubena Ezenwoko, operate as a Chief Commercial Officer for Daystar Power Group. I was part of the founding team that came together to set up a company with the one aim of how do we foster renewable energy technologies across the continent? Because if you've listened to the past few speakers, you heard there is an issue in the market and there is a gap that renewable energy can serve. If I go to the next slide. So just a brief intro on Daystar Power. Myself with the other founding members, we came together to say, what can we do? Because if you're based in Africa, or if you hear about Africa, you know that there's two common themes you hear. Number one is power being unavailable or unreliable. Number two, power being relatively expensive. We don't even get into the unemployment. You don't get into the high pollution from diesel generators. So Daystar Power was pretty much set up with the mindset of, okay, this is a clear opportunity, number one. And number two, there's a lot of impact that could be had. Number one, Africa's economy cannot be built on the backbone of diesel generators or expensive power costs. It just cannot happen, or it's going to be really, really slow or unproductive. Number two, there's a lot of ways to create jobs. People are coming into the market, has such a young population, but there's no jobs. And there's a way to actually meet that gap here. And then number three, we have to look at the climate, because ultimately we still need a planet to be able to inhabit over the next few years. So we found out that renewable energy actually provides us the opportunity to meet all those access points while also advancing the continent forward. So a brief intro on Daystar Power. We've been here for about 4 years, a young but aggressive company. We present now in 4 West African countries with over 250 systems. And one key stat we're very proud of is we've been able to employ and train over 100 staff across these 4 countries to keep pushing the message. And recently we raised about $63 million to keep expanding our operations here. Also proving the case that it is possible to set up companies and do it, because our vision is in the next few years, we need more companies like us around, because there's such a huge market that we alone are unable to fill. The current situation we see in Africa right now, due to the largely unreliable grid in different aspects of the continent, there's a widespread use of diesel generators, particularly in Western Africa. So if you look at the charts on the left, it gives you a map of Africa and also shows you diesel consumption in liters per year. Admittedly, my home country of Nigeria seems it's definitely much worse than everywhere else. But on the right-hand side, you're able to see that grid expenditure goes up and then there's still a use for diesel generators. So that's one angle that we have. And again, with the use of diesel generators, they're not only expensive financially, but also in terms of the impact they have in our environment. Let's use Nigeria as an example. In my home country, public utilities are only able to deliver less than 20% of the required power into the economy. So let's talk about how much is the actual demand. Our demand for power is about 26 gigawatts. Our grid provides us with 4 on a good day. 14 gigawatts additional comes from self-generating assets, meaning gas or diesel generators. So if you combine what we get from the grid and self-generation, that's still only about 18 gigawatts, meaning there's still 8 gigawatts that's completely unmet, which is why there's been such a huge push to foster mini grids, solar home systems, and then decentralized systems to try and meet that gap. from our perspective, the entire sub-generation and unsatisfied demand are the opportunity, because that's the gap that renewable energy can actually fulfill. It's almost unrealistic to expect grid expansion to meet that demand, at least not in the next generation or two. So we feel that that's a huge opportunity, especially when you consider the fact that in Nigeria, over about $14 billion is spent on the purchase and maintenance of diesel generators, which lets you know that that is not only expensive, it's also not sustainable moving forward, especially when you compare that to what our actual budget for the year is. That makes up almost half of the annual budget for the country. The second scenario in other African countries, especially in West Africa, that you would notice is countries like Ghana, Togo, Senegal, where they have a more reliable grid that's pretty much available. The issues they face there is high power costs. So if you compare the cost in Ghana, that's $19 per kilowatt hour, to Norway, the US, or China, you can see the huge gap. So Ghana is more than double what they pay in all these other countries. And then you ask yourself the question, how are these businesses able to function? How are they actually able to sustain? It's a lot difficult. It puts a lot of pressure on them. For example, I know in some West African countries, if you look at their books, their financials, power makes up top 2, top 3 of their operating costs. So it makes it harder for them to do business. So we've said, okay, on one end, you have an unreliable grid and a huge reliance on diesel generators. On the other side, you have really expensive costs when the grid is available. And then sometimes, even when it's available, the quality of the power is not the best. And also the source of the power is also not the best. And we've figured out that renewable energy finds a way to bridge that gap. And here's what we believe is the opportunity in the future landscape for Africa's energy future. We think it's going to be a combination of different technologies, and it's going to be a patchwork of different sources. One thing we are blessed with on the continent is great radiation. So what we believe is the public grid will still be there, right? And we try to make use of any available space, ground mounts, rooftops, carports, and also try to mix it in with different technologies like energy storage and gas or diesel generators where available. Depending on where you are, you might not be able to completely go off grid, but that doesn't stop us from finding a way to create hybrid solutions or hybrid systems that make it all work together. So we think it's going to be a combination of these different sources. Our aim is to make solar renewable sources the primary function, the primary source of power, and then have that complemented by the grid and then any other available sources available. So what are the opportunities available? Due to the power availability, stability, and pricing variance across different continents, it's hard to expand generation capacity. So we believe this actually gives people the best way forward. And we also think what would be the key difference would be innovative business models. One of the first models we started this in Nigeria a few years back was what we call power as a service. So one of the key things that prevent people from going into renewable energy or solar in general is the huge capital cost. Although costs have gone down, most people are unwilling to pay the cost upfront. So with this model, we're able to tell a client that we will give it to you over a long-term contract, eliminating the need for a capital cost. And once you take away that cost element from people, they're more willing to go into it because they understand it could save them money. They understand the impact on the environment. And the one key barrier that they might have being the upfront capital cost, you take it away from them. Another option we have is solar as a service, where if you look at a huge factory like Coca-Cola, who happens to be one of our clients, we install as much solar as we can on their roofs. And during the daytime, whatever is produced gets fed directly into their facility, sometimes producing up to 50% of their daytime power needs. That way, they reduce their reliance on the grid and also on the diesel generator, and significantly reduce how much diesel they're consuming, or if sometimes even downsize size of generator that they use, which makes a huge difference for them, especially with their goal to be carbon neutral in the coming years. And what are some of the enablers that have actually made this possible over the last few years? Because we've noticed a huge drive over the last 3 to 5 years. Number one, business model innovation. So like you see, there's a transition from a lot of industries to outsourcing their power services. Before, there was a lack of trust, a lack of understanding and awareness of what's available. But now, as the market begins to grow, as the industry, that's the decentralized energy industry and also renewable energy continues to grow, people are more willing to actually outsource this to private companies to actually run it for them, even mini grids as well. System price innovation. We've seen that there's been a huge drop in the cost of systems over the last few years, especially storage, which would make the key difference in being able to fully go off grid or actually reduce your reliance on diesel generators. Energy storage, and now there's new technologies coming up like solar hydrogen, which we're also working on to see how we can do it. So these type of innovations make it easier to further reduce your reliance on expensive grid and diesel generators. And also the mix of how you can put all these together, because before most people felt you could only use one or the other, but now we're able to show that you can mix solar with gas, with biogas, with hydrogen, with diesel generators, with the public grid. And then that leads to the future that we believe is going to be, which is a patchwork of all the sources coming together to reduce the use of non-clean sources. Lastly, this just gives an example of some of the improvements we're able to see, because ultimately, apart from the climate change and everything else that we want to bring, we know that for most corporates, especially commercial and industrial clients, one key thing for them is the economic impact it has, financial impact. Well, how does it affect their books? So once we're able to utilize our technology and give them savings of up to 30%, it makes a huge deal. So one, they trust the system, they see that it's working. And then number two, they are now able to see that it has huge impact for them and they're bored, and it makes it easier for them to actually adopt it more. Our aim is to have panels on almost all the roofs we see available, just so we can always generate as much clean energy as possible. So far, we've been fairly successful with that, deploying over 25 megawatts in over 250 sites with huge global leading clients and also clients across the region. We're active in 4 main countries at the moment: Nigeria, Senegal, Ghana, Togo. And we're just doing our part to see how we can help foster the growth of renewable energy deployment in the continent. These are just some pictures of some of the work we've done. So we have systems from 30 kilowatts to about up to 2 megawatts across the 4 different countries. And yeah, it's been a great journey so far. Happy to be part of this panel again, and looking forward to playing more of a role in seeing how we can expand the use of off-grid systems, especially for industrial and commercial clients. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Victor, for that very interesting presentation. As Hugo had mentioned, the private sector is extremely important, and so we're very pleased to be able to have the private sector participate in this panel. And I think the other thing that we also tend to see when it comes to solar and other non-traditional renewables in particular is very active, smaller entrepreneurial private sector companies. So thank you very much for sharing with us some of the things you're doing. You made a very important point that I think it's always very significant to repeat, is to recognize that unfortunately, electricity tends to cost more in poor countries. And so that just exacerbates the competitive disadvantage that many poorer countries face as compared to industrialized ones. So important to improve quality of service, reliability, and things like that. For our next presentation, we're going to move from Western Africa to Eastern Africa. I'm very pleased to have as our next speaker, Dr. Wafula Wekeza, who's based in Nairobi. Dr. Wafula is a certified energy manager, certified by the Association of Energy Engineers, and is also a renewable energy lecturer and senior researcher at Multimedia University of Kenya. So very much pleased and look forward to your presentation, Dr. Wafula.
Thank you, Philip. You will allow me to share my presentation. Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to take this opportunity also to acknowledge my fellow panelists. Just speaking from where Victor has left, especially on the applications of these off-grid systems in our Sub-Saharan continent or region. I'm based at Multimedia University of Kenya, as Philip mentioned. And we have a Renewable Energy Research Consortium, where, of course, we implement our renewable energy projects. Just for the sake of viewers, of course, Kenya, as Philip put it, is in East Africa. And basically, our institution is just in the capital city of Kenya. Multimedia University, of course, being within Kenya and we being within East Africa, it means we are also advantaged because, of course, part of our country is within the equator. And actually, the equator just passes, so cuts across the country. And we are lucky that actually we have almost even 5 peak solar hours in a day. So being a public university, of course, we are also engaged, as I said earlier on, in research. And back to our topic, Sub-Saharan region, of course, is endowed or maybe has an advantage of quite a number of renewable energy resources, starting from biomass, wind. We have plenty of sunshine, photovoltaic. Then in parts, especially in Kenya, there's a lot of energy mix, which is composed of geothermal. Hydropower, of course, is also part of the renewable energy mix within this Sub-Saharan. And us having come from maybe the research background, of course, as the Renewable Energy Research Consortium, we are now keen on, just the modeling of the smart grids, and of course, look at how can we actually, like the way Victor put it, the most challenging part, especially of off-grid systems, is the storage systems. How can we reduce this cost? And of course, we cannot do that without the participation of maybe the communities. And of course, there's this private ownership, which actually has been on a high increase in most parts, or in most regions, in most parts of the Sub-Saharan Africa. So engaging that so that at the end of the day, we have an ultimate, what we call an ultimate energy system, taking into account smart technologies and taking into account the measures that can actually reduce these costs, what we are calling the storage costs. And especially the research which we are keen on to combat all this is we are keen on the energy saving within the generation plants. We are keen also, maybe as maybe a continent, we need to look at how is the mobility in terms of whether it's the power, whether it is heat, how is the mobility of this energy that is being actually harvested or generated within our plants. Then lastly, as I said, I think this was also emphasized by my earlier panelists, we need to think on how actually we can put more investment and maybe innovation on this storage, because it's becoming a major issue when it comes to the off-grid energy, off-grid solar or systems within our continent and even the whole world. So there's need for smart technologies, and this needs a lot of research. This means a lot of innovation. This means even those of us who are in the research institution needs a lot of time commitment and even a lot of partnership so that we can actually see and compare the innovations that are coming up to just make sure that the costs of the off-grid systems go down. So back to the off-grid systems, especially for residential consumers. Victor talked more about the commercial, but I'll focus on the just residential consumers within this block or this sub-Saharan region. And maybe just for our viewers, when we talk about off-grid, of course, you can either maybe mean a micro or mini grid, simply a small grid, which can actually serve maybe a specified village or maybe a specified population, as you can see here. Then mostly you'll find that most of these off-grids come up because of the distance away maybe from the main electrical grid. Then there's this standalone, off-grid standalone systems, of course, which can be, as I'll mention later, maybe they can be solar home systems, can be wind home systems, and etc. And actually the Sub-Saharan Africa is very keen on this because depending on our income levels within our households, you'll notice that actually most of the population, about 9% of the population of our off-grid systems now are composed of this standalone system as compared to the mini grids, because to set up a mini grid, sometimes it needs a lot of resources. So as maybe we move on, I'll just maybe highlight some of the off-grid systems within maybe Sub-Saharan, which either you or maybe myself or anybody actually is using maybe in his or her home. So there's this plug and play kind of just off-grid systems, or just maybe all packaged just in one kit, maybe aim to serve a particular maybe appliance, like it can be even a small pump system. And of course, they come at different sizes. Then, of course, I'm sure you have come across the solar portable lights. Sometimes they call solar lanterns, coming maybe with a very small kind of scale of maybe from 0.2 to 2 watts. Of course, this figure is dynamic depending on the market and the catchment area you are targeting. Then Sub-Saharan Africa, actually, when you go to most of even the market, the solar energy market, you'll find in the villages, people even have actually started now to, to use the Pico PV system, whereby, of course, the power ranges might be just meant for maybe lighting, maybe one single kind of maybe appliance, and with maybe some 10 watts or maybe 5 watts and so. And in most places, and now I think this one has been on increase, especially the solar home systems. That's for the case of the solar. If you have wind, we are now having also emergence of wind home systems, whereby here you now serve maybe a multiple kind of appliances, and even maybe try to do some mobile charging and all that. And then, of course, these solar home systems, as we are going to maybe discuss about the business model in the next slide, they also depend on which model actually we are going to use. But most important now, there is now what we call the residential home solar systems. Here maybe comes between 2, maybe 4 panels. Then maybe the household is able to just maybe either use it in the cities, they will use it as a backup. Sometimes in the village or maybe outside the cities, they will use as actually the main source of power. And what maybe I want to talk about this kind of residential home system. I just want to maybe look at what are their business model, especially when it comes to the purchase. Of course, in our continent or in the Sub-Saharan region, you'll notice that there are many business models. Of course, there's one which the common one you pay, then of course as you own, or you pay to own. Ultimately, what it means is once you are fully paid, then it means now you become the owner. Then there's this model which, of course, has been common, the pay as you go. It happens, and mostly you'll find maybe There's some initial deposit, which takes place. Then, of course, they automate your system, maybe monitored over SIM card. Then once, of course, you are fully paid, or you clear the balance in maybe installments, maybe it can be annually, you become the full owner. Then maybe, as I just discussed that, of course, these models come with different kind of purchase systems. So you find whereby you have maybe a solar home provider doing for you microfinancing, being in charge of installation. Then maybe sometimes they do what we call, if you're lucky, they will do what we call the after sale services. Then, of course, there is the other one whereby we are having the microfinancing coming in, but now there is the energy company, which actually does the installation and does also maybe the after sale service. But one key thing that maybe as maybe a resident of this region is that you need to, when you're going for whichever model, whether you are actually paying annually or whether you are paying upfront, there are key things that maybe you need to consider, especially the issue of affordability. Yeah, is it acceptable to the households within the Sub-Saharan region? And of course, talk about affordability, you cannot avoid the cost. So, and the cost, of course, also goes with the quality. So it's very good to identify which place can I actually get? Can I get not only qualified installers or technicians, but also the quality products. Then, of course, after you do that, you cannot forget the issue, the number 2 item that you need to consider, the issue of maintenance and operations. So operating and maintenance has to be considered, and this has affected most of the off-grid within the region, because in most cases, once you install, of course, maybe the maintenance can take even after maybe 1 year, or if there is any maybe issue, is when maybe the installation company or maybe the people in charge come and check. Then lastly, of course, we cannot avoid to talk about the storage. You need to ask yourself, how long will you take to maybe change or replace the batteries? Because as I said, as Victor also put it, off-grid systems, this is the major challenge. The cost of batteries make actually them to actually be a bit expensive. As we move on, of course, being a research consultant, so we are coming in more in to combat this by doing the capacity building within our continent. And of course, we have a target of at least 100 energy professionals to be trained in a year. So I want to end there and maybe just say thank you as I wait for any question.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Wafula, for that very interesting presentation. Very much struck. You started early on with storage, you ended with storage, very much a critical issue when we're talking about some of these non-traditional renewable sources. I thought another important point that you made was a reminder that while Sub-Saharan Africa faces many challenges, it also has important advantages in terms of solar and biomass and the other points that you alluded to. So also always important to remember that there are always 2 sides to any coin. And then I think the last point I wanted to touch on that you raised, which I also thought was important, was the issue of citizen participation. And the fact of the matter is, when we start going into things like solar home systems, wind home systems and the like, we're finding ourselves in a situation where the traditional consumer is not simply getting electricity from some nondescript power plant located potentially hundreds of miles away, but is actually participating as a producer. And that obviously changes the whole nature of the whole governance structure that we need to think about in terms of how do we promote this in particular in urban settings. So this is very much allows us to go to our last speaker, who is also in Nairobi, but and also sits within a university, and I think will provide a very interesting complementary perspective on things. Professor Israel Pereira da Silva is a professor at Strathmore University in Nairobi, where they have established some new programs regarding energy, clean energy, and development. So look very much forward to your presentation, Professor.
Thank you very much, Philip. So I have about 10 minutes. I'm going to time myself so that I don't disturb, because I think we are running a bit out of time. But the way I wanted it to start it is by thanking you for providing this platform where I can talk, and also thanking my colleagues, the other panelists, who kind of set a kind of, how could I say, a structure around which I could put my 2 cents regarding the role of capacity building in the energy transition in Africa. So first thing, yes, I am an electrical engineer by profession. I've been in this East African region since last century, 1997, I came here, and which means I am more Kenyan than 70% of the Kenyans, because they are below 23, 77, the population, no, 70%. So, yeah. So what happens when I joined Strathmore University about 11 years ago, 2010, the field of renewable energy, mainly solar, was just beginning, yeah. And it was interesting with a bit of experience from Uganda, where I had spent 13 years of my life. I started a center called CERC. CERC stands for Strathmore Energy Research Center. And in this center, we started developing a curriculum for training people in solar photovoltaic. So it was, I got the support from GIZ, and it was really, I'm very grateful to the German taxpayers, because they have supported us to develop a whole gamut of training courses for the solar photovoltaic area, so sector. So we started with very small things like a Pico system, a lantern, and we went up to grid tie utility size systems that are like now the one in Garissa and the one coming up in Eldoret, some 54 mega, 80 mega of solar. So far, we have trained about 3,500 engineers and technicians in this area here, and we actually have also been able to provide training for people in 10 different countries. You know, we've been serving Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Ethiopia, South Sudan, also Somalia. So it's very interesting what has happened here, that when you build capacity and you team up with the regulatory industry, I mean with the like IPRA, Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, and NITA, National Industrial Training Authority. So what we do, we get experts, we develop the system, the syllabus, we take the syllabus to NITA, they gazette it, we get comments, and then we after getting the comments, we incorporate it, and then it is gazetted, and then it is whoever wants to download that thing from the Gazette, and it's a public thing, and then they can start organizing their own training. And we have done it actually with a number of universities, helping them also to develop a training capacity system for them. And then the other thing that we also did was to try to catch this kind of knowledge spread throughout the geography of Kenya. We have, with again, funds from GIZ and from USAID, we provided a training for 25 technical training institutions distributed throughout the geography of Kenya. So these people, we asked from each institutions 2 trainers, and then they came here. We trained them, 50 people, in with hands-on training, design, installation, maintenance of solar system for all the 3 levels. And then after they finished, we send them back home with the material for hands-on training also. To keep the same material that we had here and they went through, we replicated and gave them so that they could go back and install those gadgets and then begin training. So we did auditing for all of them, these TTIs, and then some passed, some did not. And eventually we helped them to begin training people. So each one committed themselves to train 100 people, times 25, that was 2,500 technicians and engineers. We got some people training more than 100, others training less, but eventually we went beyond 2,000 people trained throughout the geography of Kenya, because this is very important. You can't give a solar system to your mother who lives in a up country if you don't have technicians around to service that system. That will be not very wise decision. So CERC is now actually a capacity building institution for the country. We've been working with quite a number of institutions like International Labor Organization, with GIZ, with NDEV, with COSAP now. And of late, we are training people to go into the counties. As you know, we have 47 counties in this country. And since 2013, the government decided to do a devolution that give power to the counties. And then one of these powers, which is enshrined in the 2019 Energy Act, is that they are empowered to be able to develop a 5 years energy plan for their county: Garissa, Narok, Kilifi, Bungoma, etc. So we are helping them. The government has given us 2 counties to work on as a kind of pilot, but we are to continue working with them until such a time in which the 47 counties of Kenya will have their own county energy plan. And then, mind you, we had developed, there is an institution that is working with us called the World Research Institute. They actually develop a tool which is GIS based, and then it helps us to identify sources of income, consumption, and sources of power, distance in between, and then also a kind of agriculture that is held there, etc. It is going to be a big thing, a very transformational thing, and we are very glad to be part of it. Now, this is more on the issue of regulation and on the issue of the technical training, but also it is of our concern to help the government also in things like, for instance, the PPIs, the power purchase agreements, to attract funds from the private sector into the infrastructure of energy. And we are working with them in these things of, for instance, setting up the auctions. You know, auctions is a very interesting way of bringing very fast funds from the private sector into the national infrastructure, like it has happened in South Africa, Zambia, Morocco, Senegal. So these are countries where a company like Enel Foundation and Enel, the utility of Italy, can come and then says, well, I can sell here 100 megawatt of power to this region on solar, and I will charge 6.5 cents of a dollar per unit. And that's perfect, because there is no fighting with the politics, no fighting with the squatters, no fighting with, can they accept my power or not? They need the power. This institution is ready to come and invest there and make it happen. So as I was saying, the Energy Act of 2019 is a quite modern piece of legislation, and it is helping us because now there is provision for net metering also, meaning that any individual connected to the national grid can become a prosumer. Prosumer is a mix of consumer and producer. So sometimes it's producing and dispatching to the grid, sometimes it's consuming. So it has to have a special meter that is two-way meter, hopefully a smart one, and then we provide infrastructure for the government with the monies from the people, and they are profiting from that. Also, the feed-in tariff is a provision. Strathmore University is fully powered by the sun. We have a 600 kilowatt solar system that serves us during the day, and then we buy power at night because we have no storage, but we happily are selling more power to Kenya Power during the day, dispatching into the grid than what you buy at night. So we can go around, show enough our brand of zero carbon footprint. So these are things that I think my time is over actually. And but I just would like to finish with a very positive outlook regarding this thing of capacity building. We have started a bachelor's in science, electrical and electronic engineering this year. We got funds and we developed a master's in sustainable energy transition that is coming, accepting students in September this year. And we are working with the NL Foundation to build capacity at PhD level for already 163 Kenyans, Africans from 23 different countries who wants to do their PhD on issues pertaining the universal access to electricity in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Zahel. Very interesting and a very important topic, the topic of capacity building. And I think in many ways it tied in very well with what Dr. Wafula had talked about before, which when you put out systems, the whole issue of maintenance and the like is very important. So very nice ending to this fascinating different perspectives provided by these various panelists. We have several questions in the Q&A that I would like to touch upon. The first set, we actually, interestingly enough, perhaps not surprisingly enough, got a variety of questions directed at Victor, I think, because he's the private sector person. And Victor, some of the questions related to financing. How do you go about raising financing for your company?
Hi, and that's a great question. So in terms of raising financing, honestly speaking, we've tried to raise both local and international. We've been more successful raising finances internationally than locally for various reasons. I think Africa still has a little bit to go in terms of being able to provide local debt. But we raise financing in two forms, equity and debt. Most of our financing are raised in debt from DFIs, international investment banks. And I would say for any company, one key thing that people want to see now is just a track record. So once they see you have a track record, once you've been able to do some form of pilots, once they see you have a clear direction, it becomes pretty easy because there's a lot of inflow of capital into this space right now. For the most part, the key things they look for, do you have a team on the ground? How are your contracts? And then what's your target markets? At the end of the day, everything comes in one. The major risk you will find with international financing options would be, depending on where you are in Nigeria, it's typically currency risk because you're raising financing in, let's say, US dollars or euros, and most of your contracts may be in local currency. So as long as you can have a sort of a hedge, it makes it a lot easier. But yeah, so I would say open up, search both locally and internationally, and there are a lot of options available in the space right now. I hope this answers the question.
It does. Thank you very much. And actually, we got a follow-on question that relates to that has more to do with the issue of international donor financing and multilateral development banks. I mean, obviously, Israel, in a lot of your description, you talked about donor financing, supporting your capacity building activities and the like. And I guess part of the question here has to do with, should more be done to try to promote international multilateral development bank and other donor financing to increase access to decentralized individual solutions? And I guess in that, I'd like first maybe to turn to you, Dr. Wafula. What is your experience when you're looking at it from the residential system perspective?
Yeah, the financial aspect, I think, is very key, especially even not only at utility scale, but as you have put it, also at residential scale. What maybe we, from the residential perspective, we need to maybe look at the issue of maybe affordable models, business models. Apart from that, we also need, I think Professor Da Silva has been doing this, a champion and advise our population or our residents within the cities to go to specific and maybe certified companies, energy companies, whether they are ESCOs, so that we are able not to take advantage of our population. So working within the certified organization, the certified institutions will guide us in getting a stable, a kind of financial framework. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Hugo, what are your views on this particular issue? And if I could ask everybody, when you start speaking, if you could turn your camera back on. But Hugo, the role of multilaterals and the like, in particular in decentralized system or any other aspect where you feel it's relevant?
Hi. Yes, thank you very much, Philip. Wait, put my camera on. I think, is it on? Yeah. I think the role of the financial institution should be more directed to the grid now, to grid infrastructure. It's been directed a lot to creating, to finance power generation in the past decades. And we see now, for example, in Eastern Africa, but also in Western Africa, that we are arriving in overcapacity, sorry, of the market. So there is more production actually than there is grid infrastructure to be able to dispatch this kind of electricity due to bottleneck in network infrastructures. And this is I mean, a real problem, and I think there's been too much focus on the. I mean, if we are talking about the grid, mainly on the production side, and not enough on the grid from financing of multilateral institutions when we're talking about the grid. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So maybe I'll ask a follow-on question, which is actually for all of the panelists, because I'm realizing that we're going to be running out of time, which is just generally, are you basically optimistic or pessimistic on the prospects for scaling up clean electricity in urban areas? And if you could give a couple of reasons to support your answer, whether it's on the positive side or negative side. Why don't we go through the order in which the panelists spoke? So Hugo, if you don't mind, I'll turn back to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Philip. I think I'm pretty optimistic, but the situation will definitely differ from country to country. And for me, depending on the central grid, if we're talking about cities, it's really depending on countries. Are we going toward a fragmented electricity system or a more integrated one? I think, as Victor mentioned during his presentation, one of the key issues for the private sector and his company is to be able to integrate the different technologies that you have today, to get the best of each technology and propose a service that is cheap and reliable and thanks to solar and clean and storage and diesel, etc. But I think it's a logic that must prevail also for the main grid, for public utilities. And it will really be the question about how will these utilities cope with this change, both in terms of technologies and new consumer use. I mean, for example, you have an important decrease in the cost of storage, and battery system is a very dense solution. I mean, it can be used throughout all the power sector value chain, on grid level, for example, for integrating renewable energy sources, but also for grid support, load shift, etc. But also on the end consumer use, whether it's commercial, as a backup, or for energy price arbitration, or at the residential level for backup and to help integrate, this kind of intermittent solar home production. But today, you don't really have service contract models for deploying, backup batteries in Sub-Saharan Africa, and I don't think any Sub-Saharan countries have so far introduced regulation to generate revenues from deploying backup batteries. So it will really be depend on their abilities, to adapt and to integrate all these different kind of solutions and you use from consumers. One final example, maybe to bounce back on what Professor Israel Pera said, about prosumers. Some utilities in Western countries in Sub-Saharan Africa are feeling more threatened by prosumers. It's the case, for example, in Burkina Faso, where they mainly try to prevent as much as possible consumers to re-inject electricity in the grid when, for example, they are equipped with solar panels. So, for example, this is a bad example in Burkina Faso, but it will really be depend on their abilities to accompany these kind of changes. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Victor, again, optimistic, pessimistic, and if you could turn on your video.
Awesome. So I would say very optimistic, actually. And just looking at the trends, looking at how things have developed over the last few years. So really optimistic across the continent. We see a lot of companies coming up, not just Daystar Power. We see a lot of money being raised in the sector, and we see a lot of activity. If you look at the growth at, let's say, renewable energy or solar power capacity across West Africa or the continent as a whole, it's growing quite rapidly, and I'm pretty optimistic at how things are going. And I think one key kicker in this is awareness. Awareness is growing at a quicker pace than I even anticipated. People are greatly seeing the impact of climate change. People are also greatly seeing the economic benefits, the job creation, and all that we stand to gain from such a transition. And I think a lot more countries are being more proactive, and the private sector also being more proactive in their transition. So I'm really pessimistic that in the next 5-10 years, we can look back and see that, this was actually a turning point in getting us to where we needed to be, or at least getting us on track.
Great, thanks, Victor. Dr. Wafula, same question, optimistic, pessimistic?
Thank you once more. I'm quite optimistic, especially looking at, the bulk of the global energy, is actually being used in the cities. At the same time, looking at the population, that gives us an opportunity, because the urban population is actually growing, and not only in Africa, but I think all over the world. And more important, as I become optimistic, maybe we should think about the utility kind of scales, especially on the modeling, be it technical, be it financial modeling. So with this kind of capacity building, with this kind of awareness, I think there is a lot of optimism. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Professor Israel, same question, optimistic, pessimistic?
So I am very optimistic, because I think whereas Europe is fighting to have 20% renewables in their energy mix, in Kenya today we are close to 90% renewable. And the Ministry of Energy, and is backed by facts, we are seeing that come 2022, most probably will be 100% renewable, because we have good wind. We have now 310 from the wind up there in Turkana. We have a lot of geothermal. We have still the hydro, and we have solar that is ubiquitous for Kenya. So I am very optimistic. And then I am also seeing that the 3Ds that are coming, and like it or not, is a reality. Decarbonization. Nobody's putting money in thermal power any longer. In 2016, for the first time, renewable energy got more investment than oil and gas. I thought it was a point out of the curve. Today, 2021, the International Energy Agency is telling you that the investment so far this year in renewable is 3 times the investment in oil and gas. The second D is decentralization. If you produce the power where you use the power, you are doing away with investment in transmission and distribution. And just as an extra, you do away with the losses in transmission and distribution. And finally, digitalization. We are going into the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, this smart metering, smart everything. One day, Philip will receive an SMS from his fridge telling him, bring eggs, you know, because yeah, so all these things is showing for us that actually we needed to build capacity for this new revolution, which is here to stay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not looking forward to that message from my refrigerator unless I get one from my microwave at the same time.
Exactly.
We're almost out of time. And what I want to do is maybe ask each of you to respond to the following question. You have about a minute or so to respond to it. And in some ways, it actually picks up on the last point that you made, Professor Zael. But it ties into an exchange that we had at the very top of the discussion between Marc-Antoine and Murugi when Murugi was describing some of the coal that has been discovered in certain parts of Kenya, and Marc-Antoine was explaining why, from his perspective, it didn't make sense to do that. So obviously what we know we're all facing is very much the issue of climate change concerns. It's concerns obviously within Sub-Saharan Africa, but it also affects donors and outsiders' views as well. And so my basic question is the following, is whether you view the climate change concerns that exist as an opportunity or a constraint to expanding the electricity systems of Africa. And so we'll go in reverse order from the actual presentation. So I'll start with you, Professor Zael.
I want to tell you that I am again very optimistic for a very simple reason. In our campus here in Strathmore, we have an institution called Kenya Climate Innovation Center. It was a project from the World Bank that we started in 2012, but now is an independent institution which is doing a lot in terms of bringing power, in terms of business for people in rural area, targeting most specifically women and the youth. It is a 22 million euro project from the European Union. And what we are seeing actually in rural areas is just that, yeah, people are, the moment they are availed electricity, being it mini grid or a grid extension or other systems that they have there, they go instantly into value addition. They create wealth by welding and water pumping and maize milling and food conservation, etc., etc. So, and then they are using also technology that is now available on your mobile phone, marketing, etc. So I feel that these things are going together: electricity, access, and then development of the wealth of people in rural areas, and then many of, as you know, will come to the urban areas. So I wish I could live until 2040 so that I could see this continent beaming. And besides, Africa is the only continent which is being demographically positive. They have youth that is going to be able to work very well for the planet in 2040. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Dr. Wafula, same question, just a minute. Are climate change concerns an opportunity or a constraint to the development of Africa's electricity systems?
Thank you again, Phil. 100% optimistic. Why do I say so? Looking at what is happening, especially in our cities, be it the construction, be it the transport, be it the technology, and then look at the work, the youth, the digital youthful energy that is with us, especially our youths, the innovations, even in our learning institutions that they are coming up with, the ideas that they have, I think if all these ideas are put together, if they are put in like an incubator and then mentored so well, I think we are optimistic with these changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Victor?
Hi, so going on the back of what Dr. Wekasa just said, I hope I got that right. I would say, I think it's a great opportunity, especially because a lot of times concerns or these type of issues bring out the most innovation that we see in the world today. So with the climate change concerns that we see, a lot more attention is being put into it, a lot more thought process, a lot more money. So I think all these factors coming into it, we have a higher chance of innovation, higher chance of widespread action against it. So I definitely think all of this would lead to definitely expanding the electricity systems and lead to a much more cleaner, renewable, sustainable future in Africa.
Thank you for that. And Hugo, last word.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. I think I'm pretty optimistic as well, mainly because I think from the results of the model, you know, like, I mean, Africa obviously have a gigantic solar potential, and we see that in the past years, centralized solar has developed well in Sub-Saharan Africa, but not nearly at the percentage of what its potential really is. You know, like today in Sub-Saharan Africa, you must have like about 7 or 8 gigawatts of installed solar capacities centralized. But these new technologies, I think this is what we saw from the model in Mali, are arriving in the cities also. Like, and so I think it was a good surprise when I saw that, and when I see that in other cities, because this kind of penetration of decentralized solar, like clean technology in the urban cities, are not well covered, and we are mainly talking about diesel generators when we're talking about decentralized systems of Southern Africa. So I think I'm pretty optimistic, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. So basically, stepping up clean electricity, looking up. Thanks to all the panelists for your very interesting and thoughtful presentations, as well as for your responses during the Q&A, which obviously wasn't prepared. So thank you very much for thinking quickly and giving some very interesting insights. Very much struck by, on the one hand, the optimism, but also the point about innovation and the opportunities for innovation, everything that you're all doing to promote innovation. So once again, thank you to all the panelists. What I would like to do at this point is turn it back over to our host, Dr. Murugi. But before I do that, I would also like to once again thank Ifri, and thank in particular the Global Center here there in Nairobi for hosting this event, and for giving us at the Center on Global Energy Policy, and I'd like to speak on behalf of my colleague as well, Karim Desiree, an opportunity to participate in this. So Dr. Murugi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Philip. And thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to all the people who attended this event. We end on a note of optimism, and I'm really glad that that's where we're going. You know, there's hope in the future, and we're looking to a clean energy future. I urge you to please look out for more events. We are having this series continuing on other issues, we're including on our mailing list, and you can look out for other events that we'll be hosting. Otherwise, thank you, Philip, for moderating, and thank you for all our panelists again, and our attendees as well. Thank you, and goodbye. Thank you.